name is Lydia-Anne and I will be facilitating today's panel discussion. The Youth Speaking Leaders panel discussions are made possible by active citizenship and sponsored by Public Ethos Consulting. These discussions are a legacy project of the late Prof. Daniel Plaatjes, wherein he wished for a place for the youth of South Africa to speak boldly and proudly and have informative conversations about the world today and the South Africa that they wish to see in the future. If you have any questions for our panelists today, the Zoom call chat room is open to the audience as well as the Facebook call chat room. Furthermore, please make use of the hashtag YouthSpeakLeaders on all social media platforms if you wish to speak to us further. Social contract theory provides a theoretical framework for understanding the relationship between individuals and the government and the basis for legitimacy and authority in political systems. I'll now hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Caitlin Rawson, would you like to go first, please?
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be part of this panel. I'm Caitlin, and I am a honors graduate from UCT in the field of politics, philosophy, and economics. I also have a social media account on TikTok where I speak a lot about politics and news events and current events, particularly to a youth audience, and I love engaging with my audience and finding out about particularly what the youth are talking about in terms of how they are reflecting on politics and news and current events. And at the moment, I'm focusing a lot on education with my audience about the upcoming elections and the various political parties that are contesting these elections, as well as the sorts of issues that youth and people in my audience are really concerned about going into voting in these elections.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Howard?
Hi, hello. Like Lydia said, I am Howard Mkebe. I am a LLB student here at UCT. Currently, I don't hold any sort of position or anything permanent outside of studies because that's where I've sort of diverted my energy to for the year. But I do from time to time engage wherever I can with current affairs and politics. I also in the process of concluding my book. I'm also a huge fan of Caitlin's content on TikTok. That's how I actually keep up with current affairs as of late. So yeah, thank you. I'm also excited to be here and welcome to everyone.
Thank you so much. And we have a special first-time guest for today, AJ.
Hi everyone, my name is Ajani Nyandu. I am an honors student at UCT. I'm studying oceanography. I also am a social justice activist. And just like Caitlin, I also have started a little mini series on Instagram where I like to talk about a lot of environmental and social issues that affect South Africans and Africans in general. Yeah, I'm so excited to be on this webinar.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you all. So just a reminder to the audience, to those who have joined us, if you have any questions for our panelists, the Zoom call chat room is open, as well as the Facebook call chat room is open for you to ask our panelists questions. Furthermore, please make use of the hashtag YouthSpeakLeaders on all social media platforms. So shall we begin? Citizens will ask questions about the social contract theory to better their understanding and its implications of their rights, responsibilities, and the functioning of society. During our panel discussion tonight, we will be addressing some of the questions citizens have about governments, social contract, and in relation to the BELA Bill and the upcoming elections, as you all have reference to. So I think we'll start with Caitlin. What is the social contract?
So in brief, the social contract comes from a long history in political philosophy, but it is basically the idea that as citizens of a country, we enter into a sort of contract with our governments in which we do, to a certain extent, give up some of our freedoms. We live in a society where we cannot just do whatever we want at whatever time. There are some restrictions on what we can do, but that is for the betterment and the good of society as a whole. And so that important rights of yours are not infringed upon by others. Because if everybody was able to do exactly as they pleased all the time with no consequence, and there was no sort of enforcement or contract restricting certain behaviors, then other people's behavior might infringe on your rights, and your behavior might infringe on other people's rights. So we have rights that are protected under a constitution, and that constitution essentially forms our social contract as citizens of a country with our government.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Kawa and AJ, can you please brief us on why we should care as citizens about the social contract, and what does it mean in relation to our individual rights?
I don't know.
Hi, can you hear me now? I think the social contract is important because it sort of gives us a framework in how we look at our rights or how we interpret them. There's an old saying that people like to say, it's not just rights, but you also have corresponding responsibilities as well. So I think the importance of the social contract theory allows us to look at our democracy and our rights in that framework where we understand that your rights are a direct result of the obligations people owe to you and how far they actually fulfill those obligations towards you. So once you look at it from that perspective, then it's just from just these things you're entitled to, but it's more about looking at rights as these obligations that we place upon ourselves and others for a more, I want to say, synchronized way of living or society.
Thank you so much. And then AJ, what does it mean in relation to our individual rights, the social contract?
So what this means basically is that a social contract establishes those boundaries within which your rights can be exercised, which helps to balance that your individual needs with that of the society's greater needs. Like, for example, one of the social contracts that I can think of that are enshrined in our law is hate speech. Everybody has a right to express themselves in a way that should not be infringed upon, but at the same time, no one has a right to sort of discriminate or to sort of ostracize you based on the way in which you choose to express yourself. And so that social contract is essential in maintaining that sort of boundary between one's individual rights as well as that of the society, or rather the needs of the society as a whole.
Thank you so much. So then with this understanding that social contract and its relation to our individual rights, is this responsibility of understanding the limits in which we can be our complete freedom of liberated selves, essentially. What is then the relationship of this contract theory and democracy? Howard and then Caitlin, please.
So could you just rephrase that question?
Yes. So then what is the relationship of contract theory and democracy?
Still very similar to what we've discussed so far, where I touched upon how it's really about creating a synchronized society. So within a democracy, what's implied by the very word or way of governing is that everyone's interest must be reflected in our governance or in our society in some way. So the social contract theory then comes in and allows us to essentially note how we can best organize, or sort of like rather recognize all those interests of everyone.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything that's been said so far about how social contract theory relates into our democracy. But I would also say that it comes into play in our laws. So we have laws that restrict our behavior, and we have a government that we have voted into power that is responsible for enacting those laws. So if we bring it to the BELA bill, which we are also going to discuss, this is now an amendment to some of our existing laws that we have in place. And there is a consultative process that we go through with laws like these. There's a chance to submit your opinions and your thoughts on the bills. There's chance for political parties, various political parties, to debate these laws and give their perspectives on it. And only after that consultative process, where everyone kind of gives their input into what these laws that are going to be added essentially into now our social contract with the government, then that becomes then enforced as law. So it's very important in our democracy that everyone agrees to and is part of that social contract. We can't have some people that are feeling as if they are above the laws of the country, or feeling as if the laws of the country do not apply to them, because then we start to see a breakdown of the functioning of society. So it's very important that everyone feels as if their thoughts and opinions and their voice is heard in the way that our democracy is enacted, so that they also feel like that they can respect the social contract, the laws of the country that are in place. So that's why it's so important for people to vote in elections, so that they can feel like that their interests are being represented by the people in parliament, in government, and then feel a part of that social contract and know that you've got a government in power that is going to abide by their end of the bargain of the social contract, and they are going to instill laws and uphold laws that are for the benefit of society as a whole and to the betterment of society, while trying to restrict individual freedoms to as small amount as possible within what is reasonable for the bettering of society.
Thank you so much to both of you. So with this understanding of social contract, and then this understanding of our relationship with the government, as well as the Constitution, we then also come to the point of micro market and macro of our relation to and so, as Caitlin has proposed in her response, the BELA bill and the conversations around the BELA bill and the amendment of it. So there is a negotiation of the social contract with the government. AJ and then also Caitlin, can you please speak further on these kind of conversations and these negotiations of how citizens can get further involved with the contract with the government? Thank you.
So, technically, like, citizens do not like directly engage with policymakers and legislators. I mean, it's not like they go and they sit in parliament and take part in the proceedings. But one of the ways in which citizens can actually negotiate social contracts is by either voting for a specific political party which they feel represents their interests, and can sort of put forward a much better social contract than the party that might be in government now, as well as engaging in public. There's this public participation process whereby if a law is being drafted, or if a bill is being drafted, citizens can actually go and ventilate their concerns and have their opinions heard at these sort of public participation proceedings. So those are two of the ways in which citizens can actually negotiate with their government, even though it's through very bureaucratic means, but it's one of the ways in which they can actually negotiate and talk about these social contracts with the government.
I think to add on to that as well, if we use specifically the BELA bill as an example, we can see that it's not just been an overnight process. I'm sure, like, if you've been hearing about the BELA bill, you've been hearing about it for months, that this amendment to this bill is not something that's happened overnight. It's not something that's happened quickly. It was first proposed and drafted, and then it was open to public comment. And now, even at the moment, it is open for public hearings. So members of the public can actually go in various towns, various districts across the country, and they can actually have their say and participate in these public hearings and be active and engaged in the process of democracy, in this process of renegotiating of the social contract, or of this particular aspect of the social contract with this particular amendment law. These things are not things that happen quickly and overnight. Anytime the government wants to make any sort of significant changes to existing laws, anytime they want to amend something, it is a process that literally takes years and years and has to go through every single bureaucratic and democratic hurdle to make sure that it is something that is in the best interests of the country. And South Africa actually has really strong processes when it comes to this, in terms of making sure that everyone should have the opportunity to have their say, to voice their opinions, and to get involved in these sorts of conversations, so that we don't have to feel like that this is just something that's being imposed on us by the government. We can actually feel like we are active participants in our democracy.
Thank you so much to both of you. And so now, with this discussion about the amendment of the BELA bill, as you referred to, Caitlin, and you also, AJ, about how it takes years and years for this kind of amendment to take place. The amendment of the BELA bill, the discussions of the amendment of the BELA bill had started already in 2017. So this is not a new discussion of where everything has come from. So I think, Kawe, can you please present to our audience what is the BELA bill and the discourse that has been happening around the BELA bill? Yes, thank you.
So the BELA bill is essentially the Basic Education Law Amendment Act. By the word amendment, it just basically means that they are deleting some stuff, or rather adding new things into the body of law that governs basic education. So one of the things that they have tried to, or it comes with, is the including of grade R into part of the compulsory school system, that students need to attend as early as grade R, but with a more obligatory tone that it takes. Then where things start to become more contentious, though, is where it pertains to the policy that the Act is trying to introduce, where it pertains to unintended pregnancies. So one of the things it does, it wants to reduce the number of unintended pregnancies in schools. And if an unintended pregnancy does occur, they want to, number one, destigmatize abortions, for example, while at the same time presenting that to school children as being something that is an option. Then what they also do then is also try to, if that's not part of the plan for the student, for example, then what they're trying to do now is to ensure that just because a student falls pregnant, that should not compromise their chance to education. So actually, in a nutshell, that's what the enterprise really is when it comes to the policy concerning the abortion. What has then become the main source of contention is the role that parents now get to play in this issue. Because what the policy also tries to do is to insist on some certain obligations that parents need to take in ensuring that students do benefit from their right to education. So then it goes back to the social contract theory as to how much of a discretion do parents have in what happens to their child as it pertains to this. So there's been a lot of debate as to, again, so I'm repeating myself now, but yes, there has been a lot of debate as regarding parents. And so the social contract theory, in a way, kind of reminds us that maybe we should be looking more into what is important, or whose interest we're supposed to be looking out for, rather than a more sort of technical interpretation, or you're the parent and you're the child and those are the strict roles you play, but rather looking at what are the urgent necessities that need to be looked out for, or the interests that need to be looked out for.
Thank you, Kawe. This panel discussion is also a very informative space for a discussion such as this and for conversations such as this to go further. And so for the understanding of the BELA bill, for those who don't know, is that it is an amendment bill, as Kawe has said, that is mainly to just fix the ways in which you register your children for schooling, specifically homeschooling, and then also the understanding and then the discourse of what kind of languages is then being taught at schools. It's strictly only administrative work that the amendment is pulling through. And so as Kawe has alluded to, is that then this conversation of this social contract is where people then try and think of what these broad accusations of what this amendment is actually bringing about, such as abortion, and if we're going to take away religion from schools, and what is the consent conversation and safe sex conversation in schools. Yes, Caitlin.
I think also what's been so important about the discussions around this bill and where a lot of people get confused is because this is a very all-encompassing bill. It's dealing with education, and education is such a huge part of people's lives from the time that a child is in grade R all the way up until they are in matric. This law has to govern a huge variety of different things. So the amendment obviously is doing a number of different things at the same time. So it's dealing with homeschooling and the registrations and the bureaucratic processes to ensure that children who are being kept at home and schooled at home are still getting the same good quality education as someone that is going to a school, and that their parents aren't necessarily depriving them of a good education. It's also dealing with the languages that are taught in schools and the specific regulations regarding that. It's also dealing with, there's a part of it that deals with allowing schools to be able to sell alcohol in their premises if they're holding extracurricular events when children aren't on the premises. There's certain parts of the bill that have to do with emphasizing that corporal punishment will not be allowed in school. So there's very many different sections that this bill touches on, and what I've given is just kind of some of the things. So what happens is a lot of the time people can attach to these very small parts of the bill and get very worried or concerned and not understanding what the bill is trying to do. And then it gets exacerbated into this very confusing and very huge issue. People hear different parts of it and then they take it and they run with it. So they hear about sex education in schools, and then suddenly they're teaching children how to have sex in schools. And it's like, how do we get from point A to point B? It's because people don't necessarily always understand what the bill is trying to do. They don't take the time to fully understand, to go to people who do have better understanding of these things, and then they kind of get caught up in narratives that are confusing. So a lot of people are very worried and very concerned about this bill because of all the different things that they might be hearing online and on social media, and they're not necessarily understanding. And this, to relate it back to the social contract, then becomes an issue, because now we have people who are very confused about what is happening in terms of the laws, and then therefore getting confused about what the social contract is with the government, getting misinformation, and then maybe being concerned that the government isn't upholding their end of the social contract, when at the end of the day, we are governed by our constitutional framework, and all the laws that we implement, the government implements, has to be brought back to that constitutional framework. They're all regulated by that. So there's nothing that can be put in this bill that is going to go outside of that constitutional framework and that overarching social contract that we already have with the government, unless the government was to first change the constitution, which is not going to happen.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. AJ, so with this discussion of now what people's understandings and the education that goes along with the elections and understanding what's happening in our constitution, what is then actually in the social contract? what is our then right and responsibility as citizens, as it pertains to.
Could you please just repeat the question for me? I didn't get that last.
Yes, yes. So the understanding of rights and responsibilities as individuals, as citizens, and then the conversation of the BELA Bill, what people's random understandings of what the BELA Bill is and what the BELA Bill actually entertains, and what it actually is listed in the amendments of the bill. What is then in our social contract as citizens in terms of our rights and responsibilities?
Okay, no, I get what your question is. So, essentially, right, when I was speaking to Kawe earlier on, I was saying to him that, the bill is only as good, is only as powerful as those who are meant to enforce it, as those who have the responsibility to see it being carried out. And so, I feel that, at the very least, as part of the social contract, under the social contract theme, the government has a responsibility. We have a right as people to receive to receive information that is unfiltered, to receive the kind of correct information for us to be able to have a sort of rational debate, or not even, or rather an informed debate around the BELA Bill, right? But the government also has a responsibility it also has that responsibility for ensuring that that sort of information output is also consistent, and that it tries by all means to ensure that they are able to dispel or do away with any kind of misinformation. Because when I think of when I was listening, when as Kawe was speaking, in the as Kawe was speaking, right, it seemed like a lot of individuals were thinking that the BELA Bill, was sort of a restriction of freedoms within the school, when really the BELA Bill is just trying to sort of enhance those freedoms. So what our responsibility as individuals is that we also need to recognize that firstly, our constitution, even whether it's a catch or for everyone's rights, can be debated, but at the very least, all rights and bills are sort of motivated with the constitution in mind, right? And so it is our responsibility to also ensure that we try and inform ourselves as much as we can about what the bill aims to do, so that when we actually do have these kind of conversations, when when we we need to understand the law and the bill itself, so that we can understand how the government is actually how the government is actually fulfilling its end of the social contract. But yeah, so that's my 2 cents on that issue.
Thank you so much. No, thank you, AJ. Thank you. So we have a question from the audience, and with your answer, AJ, I think it really is a good segue into this question. So thank you to the audience member who did ask this question. This is what it says. Hobbes saw the law as a restraint of freedom. Rousseau saw the law as as extending our freedoms. Which of these apply to the BELA Bill? So let's just have a little think. It's quite a question. I think let's start with Awe, and then we can go to Caitlin, and then AJ.
Um, I think I want to depart from what I said earlier on, or what we've been saying earlier on, rather, about how the social contract really changes the perspective, or rather the framework with which you look at things. So from merely a view of, oh, this is just something I'm entitled to, or this is something you're supposed to do, but rather it forces you to consider that you have these rights or these obligations that people must perform towards you, and you yourself vice versa. And so with that in mind, then you start to recognize that it's more about the collective as opposed to the individual, or at least in isolation. So I don't think it's necessarily about a limitation of freedom. It's really about limiting that freedom. I know there's a bit of tautology, but it is a limitation of freedom for the benefit of others. As we have said again, I think it was Caitlin who said, yes, you do have rights that you can exercise, but you do not have the right to infringe other people's right in your exercise of your rights. Then when it comes to the BELA bill, I don't necessarily see it as a limitation of people's freedoms, or at least the ones that should be cardinal. Because if you look at what the bill tries to do is to ensure an improvement of the right to education. And so even that right to, as a parent, to look after a kid or to have sort of like authority over your child, it's not just there simply because, oh, well, you are the parent. It is more of an obligation that you have towards the child for the benefit of the child. And so then that also applies now in the setting of the education. So the state's interest is to ensure, or rather impose, I want to say new obligations, or rather flesh out certain obligation that a parent must have in ensuring that the child gets to exercise their right of to education.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah, I think expanding on that is not necessarily which applies to the BELA bill, it's about how you look at it. So some parents might look at the bill and say, this is a restriction on my freedoms because now grade R is going to be compulsory and I'm not going to be able to choose whether I want to send my child to grade R or grade or not. Or they might look at the new requirements for homeschooling in terms of the regulations there and say, oh, well, this is a restriction of my freedom to choose how I want to educate my child. However, if you look at it from the child's perspective, this is all meant to, like I said earlier, enhance the child's right to education and enhance their freedom from that perspective in order to be able to get that education. So it's done for everything that's been put in this bill is ultimately with the aim of trying to benefit and enhance that right for education for the children, which we can see as enhancing and expanding upon their freedom in terms of being free to exercise that right. Obviously, a lot of this does also come down to implementation of this bill as well, because it's great to have it in writing in terms of, okay, grade R must be compulsory and we are sending children to school and to get educated. But it does come down to also how we implement that as well. And I see some of the criticisms of the BELA bill have been on that there is not enough funding, for example, for this compulsory grade R is one of the arguments that has been made. So we will also have to look at not just what is written in the actual letter of the law, but how it ultimately gets implemented in terms of how much it is able to improve and enhance that basic right of education for children.
Yes, AJ, and then back to you. Kawe.
No, yeah, so I was also going to add on to what Caitlin and Kawe was saying. In my head, I was about to say that I was thinking that freedom is so subjective, you know, it's not something that has a concrete definition, because what one might see as a greater benefit to all of society may think another person might think that that is a infringement on their freedom, right? And so I was gonna say that Kawe and Keaton have really captured a lot of what I wanted to say, but I wanted to speak onto the that thing of the grade R being being compulsory for all young South Africans. I think that, the fact that already it's a, finding a crash is such a restricted thing. And I feel like most schools will not take any children without any form of grade R education, right? And so at the same time, finding a creche is so expensive for parents, especially single parents and parents that might be earning close to, or maybe even are earning that minimum wage. And so, that gives them a lot more freedom over who, and those parents that actually fall into that sort of income bracket, there's quite a lot of them in South Africa. And so for those people who might think that, this BELA bill is just going to be another drain on the country's economy, I think one should actually think very hard about, the right to education, and at the same time, the like the right and the freedom to choose where you can go and you can educate yourself, as well as thinking that, okay, my tax bills are a lot. I mean, it's not like I don't know, I've never been taxed in my life. I wouldn't really say that but I think that everybody that might be earning a certain amount of money might be getting taxed in the same amount, in the same way. And so it kind of is, it's a, how do I say this, it's counterintuitive to now then say that it's going to be an extra cost onto my pocket, when really the fact that people have to pay for creche is already an infringement on their right, because it means that they have to pay to ensure a quality of education which can otherwise be provided at like at no cost to children. So yeah, that freedom is a very subjective thing, and what one might think is an infringement on their freedom, others might think that it is an improvement of their own freedoms.
Thank you, AJ. Howard, you had a point?
Yes, so something Caitlin touched on, I think AJ touched on it as well, about how from the parent's perspective, it can look like maybe an infringement of the parent's right to choose on behalf of the child. I'm going to speak in probable terms now, because I've not actually looked out for this provision, but what you will notice a lot of the times actually is that the law doesn't just say you can do this, or you can't do that, or you should do this, and then it just ends there. There's usually like a clause that comes right after that sort of allows for exceptions, or for people to actually justify why they maybe breached a certain duty. So in general, like, you will also see this pretty much all over the place, whereby yes, you do have this obligation maybe as a parent, or on the surface level, there is a limitation of a right, obviously still for the interest of the child. But even then, there was usually some leg room where, if in your particular circumstances, you can't actually fulfill the obligation in the way that it's been put down by the law, then there's usually a room in which the person, be it a parent or whatever the capacity you're holding, you're allowed to move in a different direction for as long as it actually achieves the very thing that the law was created for. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does, of course. And as we're speaking about the social contract, what's in a contract is terms and conditions. And what you're basically saying is that there are terms and conditions that are applied bracket to order to help for the education of our young people as much as possible. And with this, then also then comes the conversation of elections and the education that comes around elections and voters' education. and with this understanding with the question, sorry, from the audience member asking about whether it's a restraint or the extension of our freedoms in the country, how does the social contract apply in the elections? Does it restrain us, or does it allow for our democracy to grow? And how do we regulate that essentially? Caitlin, can you please answer?
I think in terms of the social contract and how it relates to our democracy in terms of elections, I think elections are a very good opportunity for us as voters and for active citizens of this country to essentially show the government if we are happy with the way that they are enforcing the social contract and the way that they are perceiving it and portraying it to us as citizens. So if you as a voter are unhappy with the laws and the bills and the amendment that the current government is wanting to push through, you then have the opportunity to vote for a different party that you feel like more closely aligns with what your idea of what the social contract should look like. So I definitely think that elections are a way of enhancing our freedom in terms of giving us that freedom to voice our perspective in terms of how we want that social contract to be enforced, because not everyone is going to have the exact same perspective and the exact same opinion of where the limits of the social contract should be. Some are going to place a lot more emphasis and have a higher priority for individual freedoms, and they might want to sacrifice some of the betterment of society for that personal freedom, whereas others might say that they are more willing to give up or more willing to have even greater certain restrictions on their personal freedoms as long as it's for the betterment of society. So we all lie somewhere different on that scale of where we think that limit should be, and we want ideally a government that reflects what our perspectives on the social contract are. So through elections and through our democratic process, we can actually voice that in terms of where we believe that that should lie, and really show our perspective on that, and hopefully help elect into power parliamentarians and a government that is going to help reflect our beliefs.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. So now my question to all of you actually is in the conversation of when people say if you don't vote or if you don't partake in the elections, you don't have a say in these social contract conversations. You don't have a say in the conversation of what's happening in like politics, socially and economically in our country. Then that also then brings up the conversation, who is the youth then? Because you have to be a certain age to then vote as well. So where are we having these conversations? Who are allowed to be in these conversations? Specifically going to the BELA bill and how parents are saying that if you're not a parent, you're not allowed to be part of this conversation. AJ and then Kawe, can you please speak on that? Thank you.
So I think that it's really unfair to try and exclude people who do not vote, or in our discussions, or I definitely know that the government will never do it. It would not stop someone from going to Home Affairs to go and get their ID remade because they didn't register to vote. I mean, that would just be a violation of that person's rights. I personally think that it's really unfair to exclude people just because they do not vote. Yes, like voting is a part. I mean, voting is one of many things that you need to do in order for us as citizens to fulfill our social contract on our behalf, at least as the citizen, right? But at the same time, if what I'm being presented with I don't like, I can't now, I feel like choosing the lesser evil, right, over like choosing the lesser evil is just as destructive as voting for maybe like a political party who seeks to suppress people's rights. I'm not going to mention any political parties because I can't think of anyone that is wanting to do that. But I think that it's a very unfair thing to do. people do not vote for many reasons, right? Sometimes maybe because right now, you know, we are in a society that is increasingly relying on technology and all of those things. And, you know, in as much as a lot of South Africans might own a phone, it doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to utilize it to its greatest extent. And so, I mean, there are lots of reasons for why people do not vote. And I personally think that the government is failing on its end, because you know, it should be worrisome to the government that not enough people are voting, right? You want more citizens to participate so that you can you know, more of their voices can be heard. I mean, you know, a democracy is only as good as the people who want to participate in it. That's gonna be a recurring statement from me. But yeah, I personally think that it really is unfair to exclude people. That's my sort of, you know, main point, that it's quite unfair, and that I believe that governments should actually put in much more of an effort in trying to encourage the youth to vote, you know. But yeah, voter apathy is a very complicated sort of phenomenon, and it's not, you know, I can't really explain it over here beyond the scope of what I'm trying to say.
Thank you so much, AJ. Kawe?
Yeah, I think AJ touched on a lot of things I would have touched on as well. But for me, the focal point is really that no one should be excluded from public participation based on how they decide to vote. In fact, they should even be more active in other ways of engaging with the government, be it commenting on bills that are set to be passed. But then as soon as that starts to happen as a phenomenon, voter apathy, that is, I think it actually should be an indicator for the government that something is wrong, and figure out ways, how do we then go about tackling voter apathy? Because from my perspective, it's a symptom of something that's failing in our governance that makes people to just view voting as something as mundane or unimportant, or whatever the case is for deciding not to vote. So, but as for the exclusion part, I don't think exclusion is the sort of necessarily best choice to go about that issue. Rather, we should try to encourage people to be more, to participate more. Thank you.
Thank you. And Caitlin, this is a question for you, and then also for you as well, AJ, in terms of, like you said, your social media accounts and what you enjoy doing, and your understanding the politics you wish to share and encourage education amongst the youth, to really like encourage them to go and vote. Because as you said, AJ, like it's a good thing. Like it's a constant encouragement that should be placed on citizens to go and vote. And so how do you try and work around voter apathy and elections in terms of your work that you do, Caitlin?
So I think a large part of it is education. I think a lot of people are apathetic because they don't know about all the options that are out there. We actually live in a very thriving democracy in South Africa. We are not like America, where it's you vote Democrat or Republican and there's nothing else. We have many, many parties that are represented in Parliament. And I mean, new parties seem to be cropping up every single day. And a lot of them actually do look like they have a fairly decent chance at getting a handful of seats in Parliament. And especially this year's election, I've been saying it a lot, that based on polling, it seems that there could be a possibility of coalition governments, which means not necessarily one party getting a 50% plus majority, which means that a lot of people come to me and they say, oh, they're apathetic to vote because they don't want to vote for one of the larger parties, but they feel like they're wasting their vote by voting for a smaller party. And my answer to that is always, it's never a wasted vote. And especially this year, when smaller parties are going to be instrumental in actually forming these coalitions and being members of parliament. Even one seat in parliament can make a difference when it comes down to that last seat that takes a vote. So I think that a lot of the apathy is coming from thinking that their vote is not going to count, and a lack of education on how important it can be to vote. Even if you don't think that your party is going to get a 50+ majority, even without a majority, parties can still be influential, even if they are just a handful of seats. And then also not knowing about the options that are out there, not knowing about the wide variety of parties that exist in South Africa. And we pretty much have a party that could be for anyone in this country. So no matter what your political beliefs and perspectives are, there is probably a party out there that is going to meet at least a majority of your requirements or align with the majority of your beliefs. So educating people about the different parties, what the parties stand for, what they're promising in their manifestos, seems to be a great way of actually reducing that apathy and actually getting people to feel more empowered in their vote, knowing that their vote is going to count.
Thank you, Caitlin. And with your answer, this is also then another question to our panelists. And with the understanding of then our social contract. So for us, we're very, not say intertwined, but I would say very interested in the politics and wish to make this part of our daily lives because we have such a great passion for it. But for someone who's not a part of this kind of conversation day to day, how would they be able to get further involved with the understandings of either their social contract or with the elections coming up, or this conversation and controversy around the BELA bill? What is go about to find out more about it? I was breaking up a bit, sorry. Should I say the question again? Yes, awesome. Sorry. Sorry to our viewers as well. So the question from my side is then with this voters' apathy and the education that Caitlin was putting forward is to go and educate yourself in terms of the elections and stuff. How is then the best way to find this out? Because for us as the people on the panels, is that we are quite involved with politics and we have quite a passion for understanding the politics of not only South Africa, but of the world. But for someone who's just would like to, engage in their social contract and engage in elections, how can they educate themselves? Where can they find everything that's happening? How can they become involved in their social contract further?
Can I answer that? Okay. So the best way to get information is to find a medium of information that you are most comfortable with using. A lot of youth, young people like us, use Instagram, they use Facebook. There are pages and accounts on Instagram that try to inform voters on who is in the who is contesting the elections, who is running in the elections, and what do they stand for, what they stand for, and maybe if you feel you align with this kind of political party, and so on and so forth. Caitlin did make a lot of good points in saying that, like, like with voter apathy, it's all about trying to understand why exactly where does this voter apathy come from? And Caitlin explained it very nicely, where she said that some of them feel like their vote, it won't really make a difference. And that for me is actually the biggest cause of voter apathy. But at the same time, there's also people are, South Africa is going through so much. People are way more concerned about their actual, needs now than who to vote for in parliament. But obviously that's not, I feel like that's not enough of an excuse to actually go out and try and find out who you can vote for and how you can vote for this person. So yeah, no, so for those of us that use social media, but then social media is also just one place where you can get that kind of information. You can also go on Google, on the internet, and try and look for the manifestos and try and inform yourself on who is out there and what this person, what are they standing for, and is this someone that you might get behind in the elections. But yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Thank you. And then with this and with your question as well, with your answer, there's been another question presented after a huge coverage of the BELA bill, and that it was not, and now it has not been featured across social media in the last couple of weeks. There's just a curiosity as to why that is. As when it was being amended, well, a few weeks ago, it was being heavily mentioned on social media. AJ, you can answer.
That one is like, a little, I feel like it's a little bit easy to see because the media cycle is one that changes all the time. I mean, Caitlin can also attest to this. There's always a new story every single week, and they won't really focus too much on the BELA bill for long. I mean, what was it? Just the other day, we heard that the former CEO of Steinhoff committed suicide. Next week, there's going to be something else that's going to happen, and so on and so forth. And so, the news cycle will not really, does not really, the way the media operates does not really allow for a sustained conversation to happen around these these topics like the BELA bill, and even that Western Cape Powers provincial bill, it was on media and then suddenly it was gone. So the way in which the news cycle works, it just doesn't allow for that kind of conversation to always happen. But we know that in those small circles, those education circles, those fringe circles, that these conversations are still happening, and they will find their way back to the public, into the public sphere, in the future. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I would like to state again to the audience that our space, just to close our conversation a little bit. Our last question is, what happens if government goes against their social contract with us? Caitlin, would you please answer, and then Hawe?
So I think if government goes against their social contract with us, firstly, that is quite a feat for that to be able to happen. We have very strong institutions in place that are really designed to prevent that breaking of the social contract. We've got our constitution that is the kind of foundation of that social contract that is meant to uphold and be applied universally to anything that happens within the country. And it takes a significant amount of effort and a significant amount of agreement to actually make any changes to that. So it makes it very unlikely to happen. But if the government were to break the social contract in terms of what an individual might perceive as their view of the social contract and how they believe the government should be upholding the social contract, the recourses that we have, the first thing is, again, voting. So voting for a new political party. If you do not like what the current government is doing in terms of you believe they're not upholding the social contract, you can vote for a party that you feel will believe that will uphold it better. But there also are all sorts of institutional procedures within South Africa that are meant to protect that. And that's not so much on an individual level, but it is more on a broader level, that we have checks and balances, we have judicial procedures, that if members of parliament or members of the government are not upholding their end of the social contract, if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, there are procedures in place that are supposed to operate in order to remove those people from their positions if they are violating any agreements with the citizenry. So from an individual level, it's not something that you as an individual need to necessarily do to enforce that. But as a country, we have these checks and balances in place to try and make sure that the social contract maintains order and stays in place.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Howard?
Yeah, I remember up until a few weeks back, or at least since last year, November, I participated on a moot. I think I told this to AJ many times out of excitement. But one of the sort of issues we had to deal with in our hypothetical case was a situation which is something I think happens across democracies. But what happens is that a political party or whatever election candidate makes a promise to the electorate. So we are going to build 1 million houses by this time. And what then started to appear as sort of legal questions with that situation was, what actually happens when people make promises that they know very well that they will not even move an inch in trying to implement them? What kind of situation does that create? So we found ourselves now trying to hinge on the right to access to information. So trying to spin that as, well, if you're going to be running for public office, then you need to deliver accurate information. And when you fail on your promises, you're somehow supposed to show that the failure was not necessarily that you were lying, but rather there were forces beyond your control, be it resource, legal constraints, and so on. But I think, yes, so when be it election candidates or people who are already in power start to contravene the social contract that we have to them, that I vote you in power, and then when you get there, you're supposed to work as hard as possible to deliver on my interest. For example, the 1 million houses that you had promised. So when the government contravenes that, I think it leads back to our conversation we were having moments ago of voter apathy. But I think the ironic part is that what actually solves that is by actually using the very right that we now start to become apathetic with, which is, so if people are there and they are proving to be incompetent, or you deem them as to be incompetent, what actually the right to vote also entails that you have the power to vote them out. So I think you start to realize that actually we could actually raise the bar, as they say, or the standard as the electorate, by actually not wasting time with any political party, so to speak, or whatever electoral candidate that makes it into power. But yes, what I wanted to focus on really was how once the state begins to breach the social contract, we start to see a domino effect, either from the people themselves and the institutions that are in place to keep our government running.
Thank you so much, Kawe. I would also just like to thank again to our panelists. Our panel discussion is drawing a close. Just like to remind again our audience members, if they have any further questions for us, we'll still be here for a bit. But while we wait for any further questions, I'll just like some final thoughts from our panelists. So can we start with Kawe, and then AJ, and then Caitlin?
I actually thought there was going to be some sort of prompt to that, but yeah. Could it start somewhere else? My apologies.
No, it's completely okay. Caitlin, are you open to give your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think final thoughts is something that we've touched on a lot here, is about voters being empowered to educate themselves, whether it be on what political parties are out there and what they're promising, what bills are being put forward and what amendments are being put forward. And a lot of importance lies in education. And I think that is part of why doing these panel discussions is so important, is because we are helping to stimulate that conversation and get people talking about these things and these issues so that voters can be more aware of their rights and their responsibilities as citizens and more aware of what's going on in the country, the sorts of bills that are being introduced, the sorts of amendments that are being introduced, and also then going further to educate themselves on who they might want to vote for. I think that is something that we touched on throughout this. And then also just the importance of the social contract as this idea that it's not necessarily, in terms of how you look at it, it's not necessarily restricting freedoms, but that we all have rights and responsibilities, and those rights come with responsibilities. There are certain things that are going to be restrictions on your behavior and your actions for the betterment of society, and it's about understanding that as well.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. AJ, your final thoughts?
Yeah, no, just to also add on to what Caitlin said, voting is very important, and voting, is like your toolbox, is like your social contract toolbox. There's a lot of other sort of tools that you can use to, be an active citizen in the public sphere, being someone who actively participates and is always trying to hold the people that they have elected, or if not them, their peers have elected, holding those people to account. So it's these tools are there to help empower the citizen, to be able to hold their leaders and the people that they put into these positions of power, to account. And Caitlin also said this, rights and responsibilities. We all have, rights and responsibilities. We have rights and we also have responsibilities that we also need to fulfill. But the most important thing for me is that both the citizens and the government should try and work together in trying to ensure that social contracts are upheld and are honored and observed. And it won't really work if maybe the effort is asymmetrical, where you've got like a huge response from the citizens, but then you've got no response from the government. So it's a very important thing that relationship between the citizen and the government is strengthened, and there are lots of ways in which that can be done. But I will not mention some of those. And then with regards to the BELA bill, I will also encourage people to not see it as a way of restricting their freedom, but rather see it as a way of enhancing their freedoms, not only for themselves, but maybe for their younger siblings or their own children in the future and grandchildren, in ensuring that everyone has equitable access to education, and not only and that there shouldn't be any bureaucratic or financial obstacles to accessing that kind of education, and that is one of the ways in which that portion of the social contract can be fulfilled.
Thank you so much, AJ. Howard, can I come back to you on your final thoughts, please?
I think for me, what the conversation regarding the BELA bill and the social contract theory, I think I picked up two things, mainly how we at in a more individual level can actually be more active participants, but then also trying to figure out either in our personal capacity or government official capacities, how can we sort of educate people or ensure that people have an adequate access to the conversation. I think that was the main sort of not contention, but issue I keep picking up with our discussion about the BELA bill. So how, for example, you have the bill saying one thing, but somehow the interpretation that the general populace has is something completely different, pretty much a misconstruction of the bill. So I think even with public participation as well, we always say this, oh yeah, the green paper, the white paper, and all of those things, but one of the things I also think about is like how many people actually know of that procedure, that yeah, there's actually a green paper where you can, in a way, communicate directly with the people making the law that actually this does not make sense. So I think now, for me, it begs the question of how actually can we make sure that that is done with ease, which is what AJ, I think, was touching on as well. How can people be part of the conversation or have an easier access to the conversation so that how they decide, be it deciding who you vote for, or making choice about rather how to react to a policy is something that's more informative as opposed to maybe I don't know, I want to call it a moral panic that's created by media, but I think that's what I'm trying to allude to, just a lack of better words. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you again to our panelists for making time to share their thoughts on social contract, the elections, and the BELA bill. Also, another thank you to active citizen our panel discussions, youth speak audience for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and we hope that you further your discussions at home about the social contract, the BELA bill, and then again, the elections and the manifestos of all the parties that are available to you. So yes, my name is Lydia-Anne, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope to see you again. Thank you.